So now we'll turn the next section will be about lean engineering, enabling lean UX through the technology stack, and I'll talk about some of the technology choices we made at PayPal more recently. But I think as you understand the situation, you'll understand why I make the choices we made, and they won't be the same choices you'll make, right? You'll make different choices. But I think it's a good story because it explains how do you take existing very legacy stack, even some more modern stuff that's still kind of legacy, and how do you get the speed up to get to lean. So just real quick, I'll take you back to the journey in my own self, the way it was. My journey through software development. I started in 1985 more seriously in my software endeavors building Gato, which was a submarine simulation. And the Mac, when I got the Mac, saw my first Mac like in 1984 and bought it shortly after it came out. And somewhere around summer or whatever, I was working at Apple Computer Store. They weren't the same kind. We didn't have a Genius Bar. They had like a little rainbow colored Apple, and it was your licensed reseller of Apple, right? But I was working for it next to my college and selling Macs because I became such an enthusiast about Macintoshes, the old Mac 128K, and before the 512 even came out. And so one of the guys, three of us were working there, and one of the guys knew the head of software, the head of Spectrum Holobyte, which was a company that was making a game called Gato, and a submarine simulation for the IBM PC. And he really liked the game. And he says, "Dude, we ought to write this game for the Macintosh." And it's like, yeah, whatever. It's like this seemed pretty far-fetched. He said, "No, I know the guys, the heads of the company, and all that. And so if we get together like a prototype or something, I'll pitch it to him." He was really good at pitching stuff. Not so good at writing software, but he was really good at pitching stuff, turned out. But so he flies out to Colorado to meet with him in Boulder. This is like right before Christmas, or right around Christmas. Yeah, right before Christmas. And he says, "Oh yeah, we'll be back in like a week and a half, and we'll have a full working prototype of the game." Which is, of course, it was on James and I to do this. And we just got our C compiler like in, for Christmas. That's what kind of a geek I was, got my C compiler for Christmas. And I'd never written in C before, so we had to learn C enough to get a prototype together. And we actually got a pretty kick-ass, full working, we designed, a totally new experience for the game because it had been done for the PC, and this was using Windows and Icon and, mice and all that, and pull down menus, etc. And the old WIMP interface, And so we did, and then we showed it to them, and they were blown away by it, and they signed a contract with us, and we dropped out of school for that semester and in the summer and started writing the game, But it was hard. There was no internet, there was no Google, and this is 1984, 1985. There was everything was in. We had gotten the inside Macintosh documentation, and it was like a Xerox copy of it. They didn't even have it in the phone book edition. If you go back and Google search for the phone book edition of the inside Mac, you'll see this big fat phone book looking thing. It was just individual, and we didn't have personal copy machines back then because that didn't exist. So we were doing a job for a civil engineering company, writing dirt grade analysis software. How much cut and fill to do. And they let us use their copy machines as kind of a side benefit, and so we made our second copy of Inside Mac. And I'm saying, this is how hard it was to develop. It was only what you could keep in your head and what you had the documentation besides you could do anything, And there was BBS services, you could post something on there. That was about it, Email wasn't around, So, yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine, but that was exactly the world. So writing something was really hard, and when you had a problem, fortunately the guy who wrote the C compiler, Bill Duvall, I still remember his name, and we had his phone number. We could call him up, because we'd find bugs in his compiler, and you had this, you had this Mac that we all loved and everything, and you had to do everything on a 3.5-inch disk, and it generally took, first you had that swap thing it would do, and then we We got I think a 10 megabyte hard drive. It's like, whew, sweet. And then we got a 512K Mac, which was just so rocking. And then there's this little thing called MaxBug. So it's a little programmer interrupter switch like that you plug in the side of your Mac on the side. It's like a little clip-on thing, and it hit the interrupt switch on your motherboard, and it would break into a little debugger. I don't think I have it showing here, no. But basically, this bottom part, my tail came with me. The bottom part here, you get 4 or 5 lines of the assembly dump where you're at, you know. So you had to debug an assembly. So this was hard to try to write a game like this. Didn't know C, didn't know assembly. We did it in 3 months, so it was pretty good, and we released it. It was a bestseller. So somehow it worked. It was crazy. But I remember so many times being at the point of total despair, thinking that we would never get this thing done, because at one point, all the menus started having see-through, you know. You'd see little bits diddling around and stuff like that, weird stuff. And I spent a few days going through the code, line by line, usually in printouts, you know, looking at it, doing a desk check. And I finally found one of the first lines of code we wrote was we created the game sub, you know, the submarine record data structure in C. And we said, like, game sub star my sub, which, if you know C, you also have to do you have to allocate memory, right? We didn't. We created the pointer. We learned later about allocating memory, but we didn't know that at the time. So we just created a pointer, and it was just going somewhere in random memory, right? And somehow it worked, you know, obviously for the first month till we had more code, and the stack and the heap started colliding, and there was no protection of that back then. So you learn a lot. You have to write code like that. But it was so hard, you know, you had to write everything yourself, you know. Later, we wrote a 3D graphics library on top of the Mac QuickDraw. We actually I spent a summer or a few months disassembling the whole Mac QuickDraw, you know, taking every line of the assembly of QuickDraw, which is about 24K, I think, at the time. And it was the heart of, you know, the Macintosh regions and all this stuff like that. Disassembling and commenting it so we could understand exactly what happened at every level of the software, you know, within the Mac. And you know, we did, when I wrote a war game simulation for X Windows, I had to write the projection system, I had to write the double buffering algorithms, I had the graphics Jim's book always by my side and writing algorithms. Just saying, this was the world I lived in, you know, and then going forward, you know, there was no open source back then, and then finally, you know, the open source community has just really taken off, and it's, you know, the last couple of years, it's kind of gone kind of really through the roof. You know, when my first real big open source project was Rico, which was an early Ajax framework. If you go there now, it looks just like very dated. It's like 7 years old. I think it's still running. I don't know who the guys are that are even running it anymore. I did find that I still have a SourceForge. I forgot there was even a thing called SourceForge. You know, because I use GitHub all the time. It's like, okay, that's right, there was a thing called SourceForge. Did the Yahoo Design Pattern Library and work with the YUI team. So there I really got to see the power of open source and, you know, what it could do. And, you know, so when you're moving to a lean tech stack, it's a totally different world that I lived in back then, where everything had to be built from the ground up. And this thing you'll run into, and you'll have the same temptation. When do you build it? When do you use open source? You know, what we got to root ourselves in is why we're doing what we're doing. It has to be to build great customer experiences. It can't be to build because we think it's really cool to do something. We got side projects for that, right? But we really have to deliver great customer experiences. And so putting that filter on helps us make decisions instead of just, you know, being for, you know, because I think I was talking to somebody at the break, or one of the breaks, about, you know, somebody in the company who's just super clever and super smart, you know, building all this proprietary stuff, and if he leaves, then nobody really knows how the things operate, right?